morning, everyone. Welcome to Will Work for Food, the New Possibilities Hour. Today is July 17th, 2025. We're right in the middle of summertime, and we have an amazing speaker for us today, helping us to learn about reducing stress, perfect for a summer topic. So my pleasure today to introduce Ben Stich shortly, but first let's get to the part that Jeff always says he loves so much. David, you have the number for us today about how much so far, or about which we have been told in donations to food banks around the world thanks to these presentations.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jean. It is my distinct pleasure to share the number for today. So as of today, we are up to $838,521.76. You know, there's a real multiplier effect for these donations. Every dollar translates into multiple meals. So it's a tremendous amount of support and service that this organization and our audience members have offered for many years. So thank you to everyone and to our speaker as well for helping us today to advance the mission.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. That's, 8, 9 million, maybe 10 million meals total, depending on the buying power of the food banks. So that's fantastic. And our speaker today, Ben Stich, will tell you a little bit about his suggested food bank, which Natalie has put the link in the chat. And it is the Soup Kitchen in Provincetown. So you'll hear a little bit more about that in a minute. But back to Will Work for Food, again, founded by Natalie Armstrong Motin in the spring of 2020 during the pandemic as a way of giving back. Every week, Jeff Kachavin, David Shraga now has joined our team, and myself, along with Natalie, we welcome an amazing speaker. Many of you have been speakers, and we thank you so much. We've got a great program scheduled through the rest of this year already and looking forward to 2026. So without further ado, let me introduce Ben to you, who's today's great speaker. And any donations that you can make, if you would let one of us know the amount, we'd be happy to add it to our running total. Thank you so much for that. Our speaker today is Ben Stich, and he's going to be speaking about how stress hijacks mediation and what you can do about it. I'm sure you can apply it in more things than mediation. So we look forward to this. Ben is a divorce, co-parenting, and family mediator. He's based in Massachusetts. And before becoming a mediator, Ben spent over a decade as a social worker, helping teens and families navigate tough moments in schools and residential programs, an experience that has deeply shaped his approach to conflict resolution. And then after discovering mediation in 2009, like many of us, Ben quickly realized it was his calling. He founded Mediation and Family Services in 2014 and has since helped hundreds of families navigate conflict with compassion and clarity while staying in control of their own decisions. Ben also works as a divorce coach in the collaborative law process and serves as an instructor for the Massachusetts Collaborative Law Council. He trains professionals, and there's special kids programs and things like that he's involved with. He serves on boards, and you can find out more about his work at www.benstich.com. And without further ado, Ben, if you would just tell us a slight bit about your food bank, so to speak, about the Soup Kitchen, and then the floor is yours. Head in. We're looking forward to learning all about stress. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Jean, Natalie, David, thank you for all your support, kind of helping get ready for this. So before I introduce myself, I want to tell you just a bit about SKIP. So Provincetown, Massachusetts is a tiny little town on the very tip of Cape Cod. It's an amazing community. It's very much a strong gay community with an amazing flourishing art scene, great restaurants, and a lot of beauty. And in the summer, it just gets overwhelmed with tourists. And then they all go away around October. And there are so many people in this community who, have trouble seeking employment on the off season. And SKIP is an incredible organization that not only has a food pantry and helps people get benefits, but they have this soup kitchen that just makes incredible food that is open to the entire community. It doesn't matter what your means are. So I could go, you could go. So it's both helping with food security and also building community. Everyone thinks about towns like Provincetown as very wealthy communities. Oh, there are a lot of people who live there year round, renting a room, scraping by, and Skip is a lifeline. So thank you for supporting them. I'm a big fan. So, and if you've never been to Provincetown, you should go. It's incredible. So having said that, I'm really excited to be here. I imagine all of you have thought about stress in your practices, may have some familiarity with the way the brain processes stress. And we could spend days unpacking this topic and think about the different ways in which stress hijacks mediation. Today, my hope is I want to introduce a model to you called collaborative problem solving, or CPS for short, and it's not Child Protective Services. But CPS is an approach that was developed at Mass General Hospital's Department of Psychiatry in a little program called Think Kids. And it is a very simplistic and yet very powerful way of thinking about how the brain processes information and overlaps so beautifully with the basic tenets around mediation. And so we all know stress is important, right? Stress and unmanaged stress can lead to stalled negotiations, poor decision making, more injured relationships, behavioral escalation, we're in the seat to figure out how to manage that to make mediations as accessible as possible. So I'm not a neurobiologist. Some of the stuff I'm going to talk about is way oversimplified. The brain is the most complex organ in the human body. And so my hope today is what we're going to do is start with a very brief activity, talk very briefly about the role of stress in our lives, then talk about the brain, and then a very high level overview of CPS. And then the second half is going to be how we can apply those ideas in a very practical way when we're mediating with our clients. I am a family mediator, so most of my examples are going to be in the family sphere. I know some of you work in a range of other forums as dispute resolution experts, but this is all generalizable because we all work with human beings. So, having said that, I'm going to make a couple statements, and I appreciate, thank you those who have your cameras on, because this is going to make this activity very helpful. I'm going to make a statement. If it applies to you, just raise your hand, and then put your hand down, and I'll go to the next one. So I'm going to make 4 statements. Raise your hand if you think you're pretty good at managing your emotions. All right, most of you, okay. Raise your hand if you think you're pretty flexible. All right. Raise your hand if you kind of identify as being really empathic and have the ability to take other people's perspectives into account. All right. Raise your hand if you're a good problem solver. All right. So we have a pretty skilled group of professionals here. Now I'm going to ask a different set of questions. Same idea. Raise your hand if you've ever snapped at a family member and hurt their feelings in the heat of an argument. I'm going to raise my hand there. All right. Raise your hand if you've ever gotten so anxious with a boss, a supervisor, a professor that you just froze in the middle of a conversation. Okay. Some of you, not everyone. Raise your hand if you've ever lost your keys. Many times. Okay. Raise your hand if you've ever been so anxious about a project that you've procrastinated until the very last moment and then had to do a rush job. Okay. How about this one? Raise your hand if you've ever thought you were being criticized and then later, upon reflection, realized you were being incredibly irrational and combative and thought, they kind of had a good point. Maybe some of you, not all of you. Okay. So I'm wondering if one person would like to just kind of unmute themselves and share very briefly what the takeaway you might have about this activity, that you all are problem solvers, flexible, perspective taking. highly skilled individuals, and yet most of you raised your hands for most of these statements I made about kind of really just lousy behavior.
For me, I'd say it's ADHD.
Who is this, Shannon talking?
Yeah, Shannon.
So can you say a little more about what you mean by that?
Just the characteristics of the second set are ADHD people. They tend to do those types of behaviors, but they're also excellent problem solvers and good under pressure and stress.
Okay. So could I reframe that to say that there are, at least for you, Shannon, that you have some great skills, but you also have some skills that are perhaps not your strengths. And when I think of ADHD, for some people it's about emotion regulation. Sometimes it's about working memory and attention and ignoring distractions and that kind of stuff. So that is one of my takeaways here, is that all of you are highly skilled people, and all of you at least one time raised your hand that illustrates a situation that you were in that really overwhelmed your ability to handle it, and you weren't your best self. And of course, we see that all the time with our clients. So we'll refer back to this activity in a minute. I thank you for your vulnerability, for those of you who said, yeah, I'm a defensive human being. So let's talk briefly about stress. Stress is essential, right? Stress has a bad name. It's not a bad thing. In fact, it's essential for human beings. It motivates us to take action. It helps us stay alert. It helps us build skills like problem solving and frustration tolerance and be able to think in a flexible way. It's required for growth. A healthy dose of stress, if we are able to structure a mediation process where there's a whole healthy dose of stress, it probably is going to help support our clients to work through the disputes that they're facing. And then there's unhealthy stress. And by unhealthy stress, I mean intense stress, prolonged stress, overwhelming stress. Unhealthy stress can be long-term stress. It can be chronic exposure to domestic violence, poverty, discrimination and racism, community violence, where people are exposed to this stress for a long period of time, are constantly under a hypervigilant state. And that degree of stress can, frankly, especially starting in early childhood, interfere with normal healthy brain development, which of course then impacts one's ability to handle the stresses of life as adults. Stress can also be a singular moment. It could be an act of violence like a rape, but it also could be the types of things that we see a lot in the mediation room. It could be the betrayal of a spouse who you have found has been cheating on you for a long time. It could be the breakup of business partners and someone having to come to grips with the fact that this family business that they've nurtured for years is now going to be dismantled. And when we mediate, we're working with people who are often at the most stressful moment of their lives. If they were able to handle this situation productively, we wouldn't meet them. They wouldn't need us. And so unhealthy stress outstrips our ability to handle those situations in an adaptive way. And what we see in mediation is when it shows up, this chronic, overwhelming, unhealthy stress, we see people really having difficulty being effective problem solvers, managing their frustration, being flexible. And so I've mentioned the word skills a bunch of times. When we talk about stress and the skills that are overwhelmed, we really think about this as kids in 5 categories. And I'll speak specifically about each one later on. But some skills relate to language and communication. Some skills relate to attention and working memory. Working memory is the ability to kind of hold on to multiple thoughts and ideas at the same time. Skills related to emotion and self-regulation. This might be managing your emotions, your body, yourself. Cognitive flexibility, my personal favorite, and social thinking skills. And so all of you raise your hands a few times at those times that you weren't at your best. And in my mind, that means you are faced with a situation that required you to tap into some of these skills and you were not able to, either because they were underdeveloped or because the stress was overwhelming your system and you couldn't tap into them. And so at Think Kids, so we're going to transition into kind of a 5-6 minute overview of collaborative problem solving. The model, CPS, is both an approach that you can operationalize, but also a way of thinking and understanding people. And it's going to sound very, very simplistic. And it's a shift that when people are able to make in real life, whether it be as a mediator, as a parent, as a spouse. David, you and I were talking about, we were joking about like stress comes up, not just at work. The idea, the philosophy is that people do well if they can. That's a grounding philosophy. And what does that mean? It means that people are doing the best they can with the skills they have in the situations that they're facing themselves with. And that when they're not doing well, when we see the types of behaviors that are unpleasant or unproductive around dispute resolution, it's because their stress system is overwhelming their ability to use the skills that they need to handle that situation. So we like to say it's about skill, not will. And the beautiful thing about understanding the skills and this philosophy that people do well if they can is that as mediators, we can attend to this. We can scaffold the process. We can find ways of making mediation and the mediation process more accessible and manageable based off of what we know different parties' skill strengths and weaknesses are. And we'll talk later about how we will be able to pick up on where these issues present themselves. I have a colleague who, I don't know if he came up with this or not, but he likes to talk about how when people are struggling, if we see someone in mediation who's raising their voice or using foul language or shutting down, it's less about them giving us a hard time and more about them having a hard time. And so people do well if they can. And when they're not doing well, it's because the stress is overstressing their skills. It limits their ability to access the skills they needed to navigate conflict. And so let's talk a little bit about what this means from a brain standpoint. What you see here is a triangle. What I'm going to share with you is something called the neurosequential model of therapeutics. It's a mouthful. Basically, there's a gentleman that some of you, I imagine, have heard of, Dr. Bruce Perry. Dr. Perry is an expert in childhood trauma and the impact on the brain. He has a rabid following and it's become pretty well known because he had a collaboration with Oprah a couple years ago. And he collaborates a lot with Think Kids. And the reason for that is what you will see over the next few minutes is that he has learned how the brain processes information, and collaborative problem solving is a model that can help operationalize how to best support people in a way that honors the way the brain processes information. So what he shares is that the bottom part of the brain, the brain stem in the midbrain, is the part of the brain that helps us be regulated, helps our body feel safe. It's the most primitive part of the brain. It's responsible for basic survival, and it's the first line of our stress response. The brain processes information from bottom up. So all stimulus, all information has to go through the brainstem to move forward to other parts of the brain. And the next part of the brain, and again, this is oversimplified, is the limbic part of the brain. This is where the part of the brain that allows us to relate to other people, to emotionally connect to other people. It helps us to process safety and connection. And it's also where emotional reactivity lies, right? To where the stress response part of the brain, the fight, flight, freeze part of the brain can take over. And because the brain processes information from bottom up, once someone's regulated and is able to relate, they can access their frontal cortex. This is the smart part of the brain. I imagine most of you know this. This is the part of the brain where we can access logic, manage impulses, think flexibly, take other people's perspectives into account. And here's the thing, here's what Dr. Perry talks about. Introduce a massive dose of stress here. And what happens? If it outstrips someone's skills to handle that stress, the cortex goes offline. So people lose access to the part of the brain that's required for thinking flexibly, managing impulses, working memory, basically problem solving, option generation. If the stress continues, the limbic part of the brain goes offline. And what happens there? The limbic system gets overwhelmed. Empathy breaks down. Connection is threatening. And emotional reactivity takes over. And the result of that is dysregulation. And people are stuck at the bottom of their brain. I'm going to stop my share for a moment here. Another way of thinking about this, in a way that's very simple, is using a model that was developed by Dr. Dan Siegel. And I know some of you may know Dr. Siegel, but he talks about the hand model of the brain. And it basically is a very simple way of describing Dr. Perry's approach. And it's something I occasionally will teach my clients in mediation. And basically what he says is, this is, if the hand is the model, this is the brainstem, this is the limbic part of the brain, and this is the frontal cortex, right? Regulation, the ability to relate, the ability to reason. And when stress hijacks us, we flip our lid. And what does that mean? It means this limbic part of the brain is in charge, and the reasonable part of the brain is offline. And here's the thing that's really interesting. As mediators, as spouses, as parents, what we often do when lids are offline is we try to rationalize. Think about the consequences of your actions. Is this what you really want to do? That wasn't my intention. Why are you reacting that way? But you're talking to the part of the brain that can't access that. The part of the brain that can take your point of view into account is totally offline. This part of the brain's online. And by rationalizing, you're probably just going to further exacerbate the lid flipping. So really, if we want people to be able to problem solve and engage in conflict resolution, we really only have one job when the lid is flipped. And that is to get the lid back on. To get them from dysregulation back to regulation. And we're going to talk about ways in which you can do that. But I found clients love this. Like, notice when your lid's starting to get flipped, what are you going to do about it? Oh, maybe you should take a break. Maybe take some deep breaths. What are you going to do when you notice your spouse's lid is getting flipped? How are you going to handle that? Like, what are you going to do to not exacerbate that lid flipping in that moment? It's a nice visual. So, I know I'm throwing a lot at you, and I'm going to keep throwing a lot at you. So, thank you. I'm going to walk you through the 3 phases of collaborative problem solving, very briefly. The first phase of collaborative problem solving is the assessment phase. In mediation, we would probably talk about identifying issues or identifying interests in the assessment phase. So what we do in the CPS model is that we try to identify what are the problems to be solved, the situations that need resolution, rather than the behaviors that we're upset with. So in mediation, that's actually identifying the actual issues, not just positions, not just complaints, not just the reactive behavior, but more about what our clients want to be different, not what's wrong with the other person. Because we don't identify the right problem, no amount of our reasoning and problem solving skills will help because we'll be solving for the wrong thing. So that's the first phase. We have to really figure out what it is that we're trying to solve for, right? You all probably can relate to that. The second ingredient, the second phase of collaborative problem solving talks about, all right, now you got these problems that we need to solve for, the issues that we need to resolve in mediation, how are we going to go about doing that? And in the CPS approach, we talk about 3 options that we have, and they're called Plan A, B, and C. Plan A is using power, imposing one's will. We see that a lot as mediators. Someone uses knowledge power, relationship power, threats. Perhaps even their BADNA is a way to use power to impose their will. This is the conflict style approach is my way, not our way. Sometimes it's helpful, right? Sometimes it actually seeks compliance. It works. It gets your goal met. Sometimes it leads to lid flipping. A massive dose of stress. that can interfere with negotiations. We sometimes plan A too, and that's not good or bad, it just is. Some mediators will assert ground rules. That's plan A. That's imposing how you want people to engage in the mediation process. And in an evaluative mediation approach, and I'm not an evaluative mediator, but in an evaluative mediation approach, you're going to try to tell parties maybe where you think they should go, what the likely outcome would be in court. You're trying to assert yourself. So that's plan A. Sometimes it can be effective at accomplishing goals. Sometimes it can make things a heck of a lot worse because of the amount of stress it can create. Plan C is dropping an expectation, at least for now. In a divorce mediation, maybe it's like, you know what, I care about Thanksgiving, but I care more about Christmas. So you know what, I'm going to prioritize Christmas over Thanksgiving. I'm going to agree to let my spouse be with the children on Thanksgiving. It's going to create some goodwill. It'll bring the temperature down. It'll calm things down because there's something else that's more important. And then the third ingredient is plan B. And plan B is collaborative problem solving. It's what we aim to do as mediators, where we are trying to solve problems in a mutually agreeable way. We're trying to do it in a way that reduces outbursts and challenging behavior, where everyone walks away feeling like their interests have been met. So these are the three options. And we'll talk later about what this means as mediators. The third phase is the problem-solving process. It's going to look very elegant and hopefully a little familiar. It's a bit harder in practice. The first ingredient is the empathize ingredient. If you were a parent, it would be about understanding your child's perspective and concerns. As mediators, we're trying to understand one of the parties' concerns and interests. The second ingredient, if you are a parent, would be sharing your perspective with your child. In mediation, it's about understanding the other party's concerns or interests. And the third ingredient is collaborating and finding a way to brainstorm, assess, and choose solutions that work for everyone. And so how does this line up with Dr. Perry's model around how the brain processes information? Well, there's nothing more regulating than being heard and understood. And that's what the first ingredient does. It regulates. It honors the neurobiological sequence of how the brain processes information. Once someone is regulated, they're able to access the relating part of their brain where they can take other people's perspectives into account. And if they're still regulated and they can still relate, then they can start engaging in some problem solving. And so the three ingredients of Plan B map on perfectly to the way the brain processes information. Because if someone gets dysregulated, we go back to the first ingredient to get them re-regulated. And so here's the big question for the rest of our time here, is how can we apply, or at least my big question for today, not the universal big question, how can we apply the CPS principles to try to keep that reasonable, smart, logical, problem-solving part of the brain online based on what we know about how the brain processes information? So take a sip here. So let's go through every element of the model that I just so quickly ran through. So the first part of the model was the philosophy that our clients are doing the best they can. And I have to tell you, if you're lousy at Plan B, the philosophy can still be game-changing because it can help orient us if we truly believe it, right? A lot of people say, oh yeah, that's what I believe, but then their behavior reflects something different. But if we truly are able to integrate the idea that we really believe people are doing the best they can with the skills they have, then we're going to start with such a better place of compassion going into the mediation process. And our clients are going to feel it, even if we're not doing anything else, because they're going to see it through our tone and our body language and our pacing and the words we choose. And they're going to feel unconditional regard from us, which is going to be regulating for them. The idea that if they're struggling, it's not that they're having a hard time. I mean, it's not that they're giving us a hard time, it's that they're having a hard time. So this helps us stay calm and neutral. It helps us hopefully not personalize behavior that might otherwise be offensive in the mediation room. This philosophy helps us stay grounded in the core principle of self-determination. And frankly, it can help with our own self-compassion as mediators. Mediators do the best they can. Mediators do well if they can. We're going to make mistakes. There are going to be times in the mediation process where our skills get overwhelmed. Just like for those of you who raised your hand saying that you really were quite offensive to your spouse and hurt their feelings. I can't imagine you wanted to, but you did the best you could in that situation. So here's a key takeaway. When we believe people do well if they can, we stop asking what's wrong with them, and we can start asking what's getting in their way. And this is not about excusing their behavior. It means understanding so we can adjust the support we provide as mediators. The next piece is the skills. Remember those 5 skill domains that I mentioned and I said we would talk about later? So let's kind of do a deeper dive now. The first one we'll talk about is attention and working memory skills. These are skills that allow people to focus, ignore distractions, track time, kind of think about a bunch of things all at the same time, ignore distractions, generate options, a range of options that might address interests. And how does this show up in mediation if we think about the 3 ingredients of Plan B? Well, in the first ingredient, the regulating ingredient, these skills allow people to ignore distractions, internal distractions, external distractions, allows people to stay on topic and articulate what's important to them in a way that makes sense to us and to the other parties. In the second ingredient, the share ingredient, where we relate, these are the skills that allow people to tune into what the other party is sharing or what the mediator is saying. And the third ingredient, the collaborate or reasonable part of the brain, it allows people to kind of consider a range of potential solutions, to brainstorm, to remember not just to hold on to their interests, but everyone else's interests at the same time. And when these skills are either underdeveloped or overtaxed because of the stress of mediation, we see it shows up in ways like people coming unprepared, forgetting what was discussed previously, losing focus, getting distracted, getting super tangential, can't focus, can't think of new ideas. And when we see this come up, we have some questions that we might want to ask ourselves about how to scaffold the fact that we have someone in front of us whose attention and working memory skills are interfering with the mediation process because of the stress that they're experiencing. We might want to think about the length and timing of sessions. We might want to think about how do we want to use visuals to scaffold things? Do we want a whiteboard? Do we want to provide tools and checklists? Do we want to make sure we're writing summaries so that as a memory aid for people? Should we be meeting in person or virtually? What would help the process be more accessible? How much coaching might we want to do? Should we do more or less caucusing? How can we simplify the process? With the people who struggle with attention and working memory skills, taking things in bite-sized pieces can be really helpful. And so for each of these, I'm going to share one key takeaway. So one key takeaway when we see attention and working memory skills or lagging attention and working memory skills kind of slowing down the process is for us to slow it down and take one issue at a time. The second skill domain we'll talk about is emotion and self-regulation. This is the ability to basically manage a whole range of hard feelings: anger, disappointment, sadness, anxiety, depression, nervousness, worry. They're also the skills that are required to be able to pause, wait, think before responding. And also the ability to kind of bring the right energy level at the right time. And so when these skills are required in mediation, if we look at the first ingredient, the empathize ingredient, these skills allow people to manage their behavior when they're talking about things that are really hard and important and stressful to them. In the second ingredient, these are skills that help them listen without interrupting. In the third ingredient, these are skills required to be able to handle it when they make a proposal that is rejected. And when these skills are lagging behind or overtaxed because the stress is hijacking this part of their brain, we see people go 0 to 60. We see them get irritable. I have a client, I always know when he's hit this limit because he takes his glasses off and he goes like this. And that is my cue that he has hit the max bandwidth of his emotion and self-regulation skills. And I learned it the hard way because I didn't attend to it once. And he lost it and then logged off unceremoniously, and it took me 2 days to be able to get back in touch with him. So now I know what to pay attention to. People perseverate, they get overwhelmed, they interrupt. And so how do we handle that? How do we scaffold for that? How do we get the cortex online? A lot of it is those basic fundamental mediation skills: summarizing, reflecting, reframing, reassuring, using silence strategically, taking breaks, perhaps revisiting norms and expectations around people, how people want to communicate and what to do when things get hard. How do you want to respond? Do you want to take a more transformative mediation approach and match the volume and the words so that you can be a mirror so they really feel heard and seen? Or is it a time where to slow down, break your cadence, get softer? The mediator can be what clinically would be called a co-regulator. So emotions are contagious, right? If you think about, if any of you are parents, what happened when your baby would cry? You would nurture them. They would get regulated by you being a regulating presence. We actually can have that same role with our clients. And so here's the takeaway here. Stay calm for them. Your presence alone is part of the intervention. And you can see here like the idea of emotions being contagious with this cartoon. All right, just trying to keep track of time here. Third one, I said this was my favorite, cognitive flexibility or inflexibility, because it often is the hardest to navigate, I think. So cognitive flexibility or skills are required to be able to live in the gray, both and thinking. Also be able to transition kind of the way, moving from one idea to a different idea, in hypothesizing, anticipating how things might be in the future, how to handle things that are unpredictable, or new ideas or new situations. And they're also the skills required to interpret information accurately. You see here, not taking things personally, exaggerating, thinking things are worse than they are. Or, I like to joke, like, that someone's inflexible when they think everything is a conspiracy against them. So, how does this show up in those three ingredients? Well, when people can access these skills, they're able to move from topic to topic and make those transitions seamlessly. They can answer hypothetical questions. In the second ingredient, the relate, right, sharing ingredient, they can hear other people's perspective without taking it personally. They can consider other people's points of view. In the third ingredient, they can stay interest-based and avoid getting positional. They can forecast and go through a process of thinking through pros and cons. They can work towards mutually agreeable solutions. They can change their mind when new information is introduced to them. And when people are inflexible, either because it's just not their strengths, or the stress is overwhelming their ability to be flexible, we see people get stuck, not able to reflect and engage in good problem solving, unable to identify goals, future-focused goals. They cannot imagine a different future. They're not open to new ideas. They get stuck in either or thinking. And so we have to think about, what does this mean? Like, how do we want to respond if we see inflexibility rearing its ugly head and interfering with the process? Well, one thing to think about is, how can we introduce very small, what I like to say, like doses of gray? I think next week, actually, you have David Hoffman as the presenter. was just amazing. And David, one of the things David trains on is integration of internal family systems in the mediation process. In IFS, one of the things that IFS teaches is like we all have different parts of ourselves. And so maybe we say things like, wow, it seems like there's a huge part of you that feels this way. And I guess I'm wondering, are there, other parts of you that might feel different ways? Right? Kind of just asking some questions to gently introduce some gray. But how do you want to structure the meeting, the agenda, the length? How do you manage the time? Maybe the brainstorming of options has to be a far more structured process than it might be with other clients where they can just throw things against the wall and things happen organically. Helping them stay regulated is really important. I find with people who are really inflexible, I'm going back to that first ingredient over and over and over again. I haven't forgotten about you. I know what's important to you. You told me earlier that these are all the things you're hoping to accomplish. I gotcha. Don't worry about it. We're going to attend to those things. Sometimes asking big questions like, hey, let's step back for a minute. What do you want your kid's wedding day to look like? Right, to help them get out of that stuckness in the moment. And one of the things I love about the third ingredient of Plan B is that we teach something called asking litmus testing questions. Very simple. Asking people to think about, hey, do these ideas work for you? Do they address your interests? Do they work for him or her or them on the other side of the table? Are these realistic? Are they doable? And then the fourth question is, hey, if you move forward with this, does it create any potential problems that we should think about? And sometimes breaking down the option generation in those very specific ways can help people who are struggling with flexibility navigate that part of the process. So here's a key takeaway. Stress narrows thinking, and helping people feel heard can widen the lens. We only got 2 more skill domains, and we'll get through this piece. Language and communication skills, these are the skills required to really kind of follow along the flow of a conversation, to be able to put into words what they're thinking, feeling, worried about, what their concerns are. And these are skills that are required in mediation, and that first ingredient, the empathize ingredient, is to be able to explain their point of view, to be able to identify and articulate their interests. And the relate, the second ingredient, to be able to really understand what's being shared with them about the other person's interests. And the third ingredient, being able to articulate ideas, to be able to be upfront and clear about what they need. And when people struggle with accessing their language and communication skills, perhaps because of the stress of the situation, we see things like people not responding to questions, or people really struggling to find the words to say what they mean, or a lot of silence, or people who have trouble keeping up and just aren't following the thread. And so we need to ask ourselves, like, how can we help provide space so that people can express themselves despite their difficulty accessing the words they need to do so? Do we caucus more? Do we do more coaching? Do we encourage them to write ideas down in advance? Do we judiciously take guesses? I wonder, are you trying to say that? Fill in the blank. Maybe even use sentence stems. And so a key takeaway here as mediators is that sometimes people need a moment to figure out what they're really trying to say. Let them get there. And then the fifth domain, social thinking skills. These are the skills, this is empathy, being able to appreciate someone else's point of view. It's also about understanding how you come across and the impact of one's behaviors on someone else. And it's also the ability to pick up on social cues. So in the first ingredient, these skills are required to be able to say what you want to say in a way that will land effectively. Understanding how one's words and presentation will come across. In the second ingredient, these are essential skills to be able to really understand and appreciate someone else's perspective. And the third ingredient, it's being able to keep other people's interests in mind, for example. And when we see these skills interfere with the mediation process, we see people say things in a way that's incredibly insensitive, even when that's actually not their intention. They just don't really get it, right? If you ever had someone like, God, they don't get how they're coming across. They're probably struggling with social thinking skills. They might miss cues, seem surprised out of the blue, like, why are you mad at me now? Right? Like completely oblivious to the fact that they did something that like justifiably made the other person upset. Maybe have difficulty with inferences. And so as a mediator, how do we scaffold these social thinking skill challenges? Well, we're probably going to really step into that role of translator, which is going to require a lot of reframing, sometimes teaching the difference between impact and intent, perhaps requiring more coaching, and really attending probably to the other parties who are on the receiving end of some of this behavior. How do we keep them regulated? How can we check for understanding? Right? So someone says something and then maybe we ask back, like, are you trying to say that, and reframing it? And like, yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. That's what I said. But by us doing that work, it can help signal that differently to the other party or parties. So a key takeaway with social thinking skills, when people can hear how they sound, reframing can help others hear what they mean. Let's jump to the planning phase. So plan A, thinking about how we can avoid plan A. Well, remember that plan A is the imposition of power. It triggers stress. And something that's important for us to remember is that this is about their process. It's not ours. Also, thinking about plan A can allow us to ask some good questions to our clients to really think through the implications of their strategy and their approach. And for us to think about, oh, I see plan A coming out here now. What am I going to do about it? How are we going to navigate this? Because it is a power move. Plan C, we talked about, helps with prioritizing. We can actively choose to break things down to more bite-sized pieces, or start with what we call in collaborative problem solving the lower hanging fruit, the easier problems to solve. That will then help us as mediators build a trusting relationship with the parties, so that when they take on harder, more stressful topics, our presence is going to help support managing that stress more effectively, because we're relational beings. So plan C, prioritize the right problem to solve for the right moment. And then plan B, if we go back to that triangle, creates an architecture for a neurobiologically informed sequence of problem solving. It's a mouthful basically to say, if you follow those 3 ingredients, and when you see dysregulation, you go back to that first ingredient, you're honoring the way the brain processes information and what it needs to handle the stress that's hijacking the process. So remember, plan B, always go back to empathize and empathizing. And remember the 3 R's: regulate, relate, reason. You need to be regulated before you can relate, and you got to be regulated and be able to relate before you can reason. That's just the way our brains work. All right, just a couple more things, so if we have any Q&A, we can talk about that. Another reason I think using CPS as a template for mediation can be helpful is that it simplifies things. So we teach in collaborative problem solving 4 tools for gathering information. In other words, 4 tools for uncovering interests. 2 are detective tools, 2 are calming tools. The detective tools are clarifying questions and educated guesses, asking questions and making guesses. Guessing, of course, is you have to do it judiciously and carefully. But as you saw, maybe sometimes with people with language and communication skill deficits, it can help them articulate more effectively what it is that is important to them. And then the 2 calming tools are reflective listening and offering reassurance. You are there to support them. They're going to get through this. Reflective listening is summarizing, reframing, paraphrasing. These are all just fundamental skills that we use as mediators that honor the brain, because it helps people stay regulated. I'm going to go back to this because I've said it and it's so important. Nothing is more regulating than feeling heard and understood. If we have any job, that's a fundamental part of it. And when I took my very first mediation training 15 years ago, I was taught this listening triangle. And it was just like a really simplistic way of, like, when in doubt, what should you do as a mediator, as a rookie? Ask a question, listen for the answer, reflect or summarize back, then ask another question. And then once you've understand the interests, you can detour out and go to the next phase. And what I love, I take a lot of pride in, is that I introduce the listening triangle to Think Kids. And now the listening triangle is actually part of our training curriculum in collaborative problem solving, because there's such great overlap between these two approaches, these two ways of helping people navigate conflict. And that listening piece is so important. Einstein has this quote, which I love, which is, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. What does that mean? That means you're going to spend the bulk of the time in those two bottom rows of the triangle, empathizing, regulating, and helping people relate and understand the other party's perspectives. If we can do that well, often the problem solving, the solutions don't take as much time. But we rush a lot, and our clients want to rush. And this quote, I think, helps remind me to take space, that we have to define the problem first, we have to understand it, and we have to help people stay calm and regulated so that they can then figure out what to do about those things. And sometimes things just go off the rails despite our best efforts, and the lids get flipped. Call that emergency plan B. A key takeaway here is that to remember, as mediators, sometimes de-escalation is the intervention, and problem solving can wait, right? Lid is flipped, got to get the lid back on. How do we do that? Well, we basically use these skills, the calming tools. The lid gets back on, we can start doing more of the drilling for information. And of course, plan B is not linear. We've kind of just talked about that. Party A's concerns, all right, we got it. Now we're listening to Party B's concerns, and then Party A, because they really have trouble with perspective taking, starts getting stressed. We go back to them, we calm them down, we go back to Party B, then like we have all the interests on the table, we start brainstorming. Oh, something arises, someone's lid is starting to get flipped. We got to go back to the bottom part of the brain, because that's how we process information, work towards regulation, and then we can get back to the top part of the brain. So here are some key takeaways to recap. It's about skill, not will. And we can scaffold for these lagging skills. We have a lot of influence as mediators to always remember regulate, relate, reason, the sequencing of the brain, that our mediation fundamentals are so powerful and can support the way the brain processes information and manages stress, reflecting, summarizing, asking questions, making guesses, and that we always have three options, and so do our clients. They can try to impose their will, plan A. They can prioritize and drop some things for now, plan C, or I'd focus on specific issues and try to work towards mutually agreeable solutions. And so the reason that the benefits of thinking about mediation from this lens, in terms of, what to do and how to respond when stress hijacks the process, is if we can support the brain under stress in a way that honors the way the brain processes information, there'll be better decisions, more durable agreements, greater empathy, better communication, and ultimately better outcomes. We don't have to overcomplicate it, because at the end of the day, all this gobbledygook that I just talked about is about like helping people feel understood. That's the starting point. So I'll stop my screen in a moment. I know we only have a few minutes, but if anyone wants to learn more about collaborative problem solving, the website is thinkkids.org. And this is my contact information if you need it.
Oh, Ben, no, it was great listening to you. Those extra minutes listening to you talk about this subject is fantastic. So thank you so much. How about Ben? Do you have any last minute? You got 2 minutes here. Words of wisdom.
Oh my gosh, that I haven't already said. I guess I'll just reinforce the philosophy that like we see people at their worst. That the philosophy comes before everything. People do well if they can. And I would really challenge each of you to hold on to that idea, because you're going to catch yourself getting judgmental about people. And that's a moment to step back and say like, oh, that people do well if they can. My clients do well if they can. My kid does well if they can. My spouse does well if they can. what does this mean for me right now? That lens, that philosophical lens, is fundamental. If you do all the mechanics, but you don't have the philosophy, it's not going to be as effective because your clients are going to see through it. They just are. So I guess that's my last nugget.
And those are great nuggets. So thank you so much. And anyone who is interested, please reach out to Ben. Thank you, Ben, for being here. And thank you all for whatever contributions, your donations you're making. Again, please let us know. We're really looking forward to getting to that $1 million mark sooner than later. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks for supporting We'll Work for Food, the New Possibilities Hour, and all the food banks people you're helping. Next week, same time, same place, different Zoom link, different speaker. We'll see you then. Thank you. Bye-bye.